Good evening. The idea that Donald Trump was just going to put pressure on Zelenskyy of Ukraine and not put some pressure on Putin was always for the birds. It was just a question of time. And yes, he has put a lot of pressure on Zelenskyy to get him to the table and to get him to agree to a ceasefire. So the question always was, what would he do about Putin and Russia? Well, we saw something of this last night.
I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace. I want to see peace, and we'll see. But in a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia.
It would be devastating for Russia. They are very, very strong words indeed from Donald Trump. So I wonder, what is it they could actually do? Well, there are up to 300 billion of Russian assets, most of them currently being held in Belgium. And Russia sells an awful lot of oil to India. Could in some way, could Trump say to India, stop buying their goods or we'll put tariffs on you? I'm not exactly sure exactly what form these tough sanctions are going to take. But the president says they would be devastating. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined down the line, live from America, Brian Wesbury, economics editor at The American Spectator, regular on Fox News and many other American TV channels. Brian, welcome to the programme here on GB News. Devastating is a big word. What exactly?
It is.
What exactly could Trump do?
Yeah, Nigel, it is a big word. And you hit it. I mean, they have assets overseas. We've already taken, I think, all the yachts. We've put sanctions on. Europe is still buying natural gas and oil from Russia. So is India. And I'm certain we could use tariffs to kind of help change minds in doing that. I think back to Ronald Reagan. In a way, he defeated Russia. It wasn't in the middle of a war. So he wasn't trying to do this in 3 weeks, but he did it by strengthening the American economy, spending more on defense, which put pressure on Russia and eventually broke their back. So I think Trump has to have a short game, which is let's get this ceasefire, let's get the end of this war, and we can use sanctions and tariffs and go after their exports and take away resources that are in banks overseas. Yeah. We can do that. I think we can turn the screws a lot higher, but we also have to follow really good policies like Reagan did, strengthen our defense and strengthen our economy, which makes every country around the world less competitive versus the U.S. And that's the way you eventually win, both in the short run and the long run.
Brian, I get the logic of all of that. The American economy, it seems over the last few years, almost doesn't matter who's in government. The American economy, the entrepreneurial spirit of America just keeps driving it on. Growth at 3%, nationally 4% and a bit in some of the really dynamic states. But there are some economic worries, aren't there? I mean, as to whether the use of tariff is a negotiating tool, or whether it will be set in stone and remain. And certainly Wall Street has taken a little bit of a fright over the course of the last few days. And all right, we can't look at stock markets day to day. I get that. But Brian, are there genuine concerns that this tariff policy could backfire on the American economy?
Yeah, I'm a free trader all the way, and I always worry about tariffs. But the U.S. has been so good with tariffs. We've played by the rules, and the rules are, the Constitution, the ideas of free markets. You don't tariff consumers if they want to make a choice to buy a foreign good. We've played by all those rules. And what I think has happened is other countries have taken advantage of us because they haven't always played by those rules. So I think there is some underlying reason to do this, and I hope that the reason is to get to freer trade everywhere around the world. I mean, I'd love it if the U.S. got rid of our 2.5% tariffs on European vehicles, and I wish Europe got rid of the 10% tariffs on the U.S. vehicles, and let's hope that it goes in that direction. But it does worry me. Now, I would argue that the stock market was overvalued already, and tariffs are the catalyst, and everybody's blaming them, and they're an issue, but they're not the entire issue, because you said it, over the last few years, it doesn't seem like it matters what happens. The U.S. just keeps booming, the stock market keeps going up, and we are, continuing to invent things. But we've also increased our budget from $3 trillion to $7 trillion. The Federal Reserve has printed massive amounts of money. We've held interest rates below where they should have been. And so I would argue that this easy fiscal and monetary policy is really why we've been on this tear, and it's now coming to an end. The era of easy everything in the U.S. is over. We're cutting spending. We're, cutting government employment. We're making, the Federal Reserve's not cutting interest rates anymore. And so I think we're going to go, I now sound like a Trump administration economist, but we're going to go through some pain before we get to gain. And I'm going to bring up Reagan again. People don't remember this, but the first 2 years of Reagan was terrible. Volcker had to jack interest rates up to 20%. History rhymes, it doesn't repeat, but it was terrible. Then the policies kicked in, and that's when growth started to boom. And I think we're in a similar situation today.
Fascinating. Brian Wesbury, thank you so very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much. And I tell you what, Brian's right. The stock markets were grossly overvalued. I have little doubt about that. I'm joined by one of your favourites at home, Robert Fox, defence editor of The Standard. Wow, Robert. Now, at some point, Trump was going to try and turn the screw on Putin, wasn't he? And we've listened economically to some of the things he could do. I do find it extraordinary that EU, NATO members have spent more money buying Russian gas than they spent giving aid to Ukraine. I mean, you almost couldn't make it up, could you?
Yeah, and the gas is the key to the thing. But I want to take up very much something that Brian Wesbury said quite rightly. Trump wants a quick win here because it's the art of the deal. The way he does business, and it's very interesting what Putin has said today. He's not against it. He wants to rework some of the details, and he wants to get to the root causes. One playing it short, the other desperately trying to pay it long. But what I think, following what Brian was saying as well, I think longer term, medium to long term, looking at this time next year, Putin knows he's in trouble because of the state of the economy. They're winning, they're slowly winning, not as much as they should. On the battlefield.
Around Kursk in particular.
Particularly. But they still haven't taken Pokrovsk. And do you know what's happened around Pokrovsk? With re-engineering, electronic warfare means they've negated the glide bombs, which were so effective for such a long time. This was the retooling of old-fashioned bombs and making them into cruise missiles, and they were devastating for month after month. But around that part of the battlefield, they're playing this cat and mouse all the time. Kiev is in a desperate situation. But what I would say, Nigel, is that the real talking, we're not seeing the participants, and we're not hearing about them. Jonathan Powell, it must be said, has done a very good job with the Ukrainians, saying after the blow-up in the White House, now get real, get sensible. You've got to come up with something, and there's got to be a meeting of minds, and he's doing that. Another fixer that we've seen on that side is probably Mark Rutte, because Mark Rutte knows the art of the coalition.
The NATO boss.
And obviously there wasn't a blow-up there. Donald Trump talked to him. But it's what Witkoff is going to be talking to with the head of the...
So Steve Witkoff, who's never been in politics before.
That's right. Part of the deal, though.
Successful businessman, golfing mate of Trump's from Florida, and he's off to Moscow.
And he works with Dmitriev, in charge of the investment fund, watch that, and the head of the Foreign Ministry Intelligence Service. And we're going to hear a bit. It's very interesting that this big meeting of defence ministers, European defence ministers in Paris yesterday, my colleagues of the Defence Correspondents Association all set off. I had a jolly nice time in Paris. And what did they say after that meeting? I couldn't believe it. They said, including John Healey of the Starmer government, nothing. Absolutely. We'll go on talking. And it's really what happens now. I think that the Putin stance is fascinating because it's a long-term.
Well, let's have a look at it.
Grievance.
Yeah, I mean, let's have a look
about it in today's Standard.
We've talked about the battlefield. He's making advances, but they're not dramatic. Long-term, the Russian economy can't survive this for year after year after year. I agree with that. I understand that. But it's sort of Russian President Vladimir Putin has conditionally agreed to a US proposed short-term 30-day ceasefire. The bit I don't get is he wants to talk about the recognition of areas. He wants to talk about no deployment of foreign troops. Is he saying, this is the bit I don't understand, is he saying, I will sign the ceasefire deal provided these things are on the table to be negotiated? Or is he saying, I won't sign it unless we agree these already? Or is he, as you hinted, just stringing the whole thing out?
He's stringing it out, but it's the bit you missed, and the bit that they buried in the news agency reports. And it really matters to Vladimir Putin, the root causes, how all this began. What he is looking for, and you hinted at it in the previous interview, is that he's looking for a relationship with America and a recognition. Again, we're back to the early 1990s. He wants Russia not to be humiliated, but past that, but to be recognised as a premier, as a paramount power of Eurasia, and to be the partner. Europe and the EU to be diminished, Russia to rise, and we'll do our part of the world. You have America and China. The thing going in the background is that I think Russia desperately wants to detach itself a little bit more, never break up entirely, but they're very, very worried. I know this. Elements in the Kremlin are really worried about the grip that Beijing has in every sense, in armaments, in technology, in money, and who knows, maybe even manpower.
So we could then go from the situation we're in, where Putin and Russia are the pariah state and have been for many, many years in the views of most, and with some really quite good reason. You're saying this whole thing could pivot the other way, and that we get a ceasefire deal, we get an agreement, and that they start to trade more with the West. But that would have to include Europe too, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
That's going to be difficult.
I think it could be done because you've got it, you've nailed it. There are elements in Germany even, but particularly Italy, who are desperate to get that gas flowing, gas flowing
I know.
Even more. So you're saying, look, so you can't do this trading, the land of Marco Polo, the trader, the merchant who goes east, come on. But the figure they invoke, which is a very interesting, a man of great myth, Enrico Mattei, who reinvented the petrochemical industry for Italy post-war, post-Mussolini. And that is alluded to. There's a lot more in play here than might appear. It's well worth reading the key speeches. There are two of Putin's career when he rises to power. One, his declaration to the Munich Security Conference in 2007. I know you stand for international law and order, but you are abusing international organizations for, the word is he uses, vulgar individual gain. And then the year after, what did they do? Ignored all that and said, well, at the Bucharest NATO summit, perhaps we can let Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. Condoleezza Rice and David Miliband didn't spend the time. The other one is his strange, seems very strange end, but Harry Potter, his essay in 2021 in July, 7,000 words, about how he sees the greatness and the unity of the Ukrainian and Russian people, and they're one and the same. Look, he really means it. Holly Golightly and breakfast at Tiffany's, as you would know, our vintage. She wasn't a phony, Nigel. Do you remember why she wasn't a phony? Because she was really phony about the things she was phony about. No, he really believes in it, and we've got to get into that mindset. I think that is the strength, quietly, of somebody like Jonathan Powell and Mark Rutte. And they're keeping out of the glare of media completely.
So final thought on this. There is a possibility of a good ending.
I think it'll be difficult. I think there will be setbacks. We've had all that. Yes, is the answer, simply.